I want to talk about how service level objectives can help us with product thinking. So we should probably start by defining what we actually mean by product thinking. And it's usually defined in terms of what it's not. It's usually compared to project work. When we have a project, we're focusing on outputs. We're focusing usually on a particular part of a value stream, and we're usually defined in terms of a project requirements document that you can see here. There's a fixed scope, fixed time, fixed budget. Once this project plan is complete, once we've checked all those boxes, we're done. It has an end, it has a finish. But then we compare this to product organizations. A product team, a product organization is focused instead on outcomes, delivering value for the user, not having a defined endpoint, but continually evolving along with their user needs. Think about most of the products and services you use today. They're not done in any sense of that word. They're going to evolve along with you and your needs into the future. Now, I was involved in a project to product transformation recently. For some context, it was part of a larger data mesh transformation. So the products we're going to be talking about today are data products. I'm not going to go into the details of data mesh today. There's a book if you would like to read that. But just be aware when we're talking about the products here and the SLOs, they're going to be focused on data. Now, as part of this transformation, I joined a team, and this team was working in a project mode. They had project specifications, project requirements documents that were sent to them. They fulfilled those requirements, and then they were done, and they moved on to the next project. And one of the interesting things about this, in this particular organization, which is a manufacturing organization, every single project requirements doc had the line that a service must publish an SLO. So this was a team that was actually familiar with service level objectives, which is an interesting start. But what was very interesting here was how they defined those service level objectives. So they had a service, right? The service served data to their users, and this service also had dependencies, multiple systems they depended on to get their job done. And because they were run by other people in this company, those dependencies also had SLOs. One of them maybe offered 99% availability, another offered 98% availability, and maybe another offered 90% availability. And what they would do is they would look at this and they would say, well, this is our lower bound, right? This is the worst SLO that we have, which means no matter what we do, we can't offer more than that. This is our limiting factor. So they said, we can offer an SLO of 90% availability. And that was the end of that process. Looking at some examples here, example numbers, of course. One of the source systems that they consumed their data from published new data at 7 p.m. every single day. After that, it was consumed by their system. They did a lot of processing. There was a big batch processing job that went on. And then they made it available to their users. So they published an SLO saying that data for the previous day is going to be available by 8 a.m. the next day, the next morning. They planned this to give themselves a little bit of buffer in case something goes wrong and they needed manual intervention, and basically to time it with when people got into the office. They had another interesting constraint in their dependencies, which was that some of their dependencies weren't configured correctly. Some of the source systems, the lab and the manufacturing equipment they were consuming this data from didn't output the right data, which meant actually about 5% of the data was missing. Not great. But that also helped them define their SLOs. They said 95% of all possible data points are available. This is what we can offer based on our dependencies. So when I joined this team, we used an advanced Agile Consulting technique that we use at Thoughtworks, which is called talking to your users. It's a pretty in-depth process, but it's exactly what it says. We went out and talked to our users, found them, and we started our conversation around the SLOs. We put out these SLOs. We said, okay, we can offer you this SLO that the data is going to be available by 8 a.m. The next day. We simply asked the question, does this meet your needs? To which the user said, yeah, this is fine, actually. This meets our needs. But we didn't stop there. We kept the conversation going. We drilled a little bit deeper. We said, okay, but what if we made this available a little bit earlier? What if we made it available at 7 a.m. or 6 a.m.? Is that going to open up new possibilities for you? Which they said, actually, no, not really. Most people start work 8 or 9 a.m. There's not much marginal incremental value there. But we have been investigating some real-time alerting use cases here. So if you gave us real-time streaming data, this could actually open up new possibilities for us. And we said, great, that's actually really insightful. We can't offer that right now, but there are currently discussions going on about possibly switching from a batch job to a streaming data system. But most of those discussions were technically oriented. It's a thing that we want to do to kind of modernize our equipment, to reduce some technical debt, make things a bit easier for us. But now we have a potential use case, a potential business use case. If we do this, here are the people who are going to benefit from it. So that's a useful insight right away. Then we put this other SLO in front of them. We said, okay, we can offer you the SLO that 95% of all possible data points are available. We again asked the question, does this meet your needs? To which they said, no, this is unacceptable. We can't work with this. So we dug a little bit deeper. Said, okay, why? How are you using this data? To which I said, well, we use this data for audit purposes. We need complete data for that. Missing data could result in fines. We also produce reports with this data. Missing data could be a huge problem here. We said, okay. And then one person in our team kind of chimed up and they said, well, we have missing data, but given what we understand about the domain, we can interpolate some of that data. We can actually fill in some of the gaps. There are known and accepted methods for doing this. There's going to be a slight decrease in accuracy, but we can start to fill in some of that data. How does that work? And they said, well, actually, yeah, interpolating data is actually perfectly acceptable for some of our analytical use cases. If we're just doing exploratory data analysis, making some predictions, or just simply analyzing our network for potential improvements, this is fine. And actually, some other reports are fine with this data as well, as long as we know which data is interpolated. So we came back to them with this, and we said, well, what if we offered you this SLO instead? We said 95% of all possible data points are available, and any missing data will be clearly labeled as such, and it will be interpolated using a particular method that has been documented. And then outside of the SLO, we actually added something else. We said, we are going to work with the source system owners to improve their data completeness. This was something that the team always tried to do, but it was always as and when the scope and the time capacities allowed them to do this, they would make some little improvements. But now they had a business case. Now they could say, if we improve completeness, it's going to impact these people in a positive way. And we are going to work with you on this. We've got hundreds of systems, dozens of people we need to talk to. We want to work with you to understand what are your requirements, where are your priorities. We again asked the question, does this meet your needs? To which they said, yes, this is good, actually. Right away, we got buy-in and we had an idea for a roadmap forward. See, many of us have services that we build. We have users who we serve. We have dependencies that we depend on. And we often look at these as constraints. These are constraints. Our dependencies constrain what we are able to do. So do our users. If we're not meeting our users' needs, they probably aren't going to be our users very much longer. So these are constraints, but we very often assume that they are fixed constraints. We absolutely cannot break them. These tightly bound what is possible for us. But when we actually talk to our users, we sometimes realize that those constraints are a little bit more flexible than we first thought. Maybe we can't meet all of their needs today, but we can meet some of them and we can chart a path forward. We can start to map out a roadmap to improving things. And even our dependencies. Sometimes there are things that we can do, whether it's interpolation, local caching, to work around our dependencies, to actually start to improve that. Some of our dependencies are actually more flexible than we might think as well. Even our SLOs are constraints. If we offer an SLO saying 99% of calls will complete in less than 100 milliseconds, that constrains what the team can do. This is a governing constraint. We are essentially saying the team is free to do whatever they want as long as they meet that constraint. It governs their behavior. It acts as a boundary of what is possible. But it's a special type of constraint. It's a permeable constraint. The reason we don't pick 100% for any of our SLOs, the reason we have error budgets is to give us a little bit of flexibility, is to allow some errors and some failures through. This process I've been talking about is what's known as constraint mapping. It's the act of understanding the constraints around us. What actually limits our work? What actually limits what's possible? Where are the flexibilities and where are the hard barriers here? It's described in this freely available little guide. And I think it's an incredibly powerful technique for designing, building, and evolving products. And I think that starting this conversation, starting this exercise around SLOs is an incredibly powerful technique. Thanks.